have with us Professor Steve Keen. He's the Associate Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of Western Sydney, the author of Debunking Economics, and his website, which is a must-read, debtdeflation.com. Check that out. Professor Keen from Australia, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
You're welcome, Tom.
We had an interesting conversation a couple of days ago on television, and I want to revisit some of those topics here in a little longer form. We're gonna take this entire hour. There will be periodic commercial breaks and things, but or breaks as it were. But let's just start at where we are right now. Are we in a depression?
Yes. It's amazing how long people will spend in denial about virtually any problem, from personal health through to economic crises. But this one is a depression that is not a recession. And the sooner we make that categorization of the situation we're in, the sooner we'll start getting potentially sensible policies rather than the insane ones that are being debated right now.
Now, the last Great Depression, the one in the 1930s, was not identified as a depression for some time. About what point in time did people start referring to it as a depression and realizing the level of reaction that was necessary to it?
Yeah, it was in fact called a depression because all downturns were called depressions back then. It's interesting how one of the major things that humans do is come up with softer sounding alternatives to harsh words we used initially. Right. So a boom was called a boom, and a recession was called a depression back then. It became called the Great Depression towards the 35, 36, that period. And certainly if you look through Keynes's general theory, for example, there's no reference to a Great Depression. So only probably once the Second World War had started did the word started coming into the term Great Depression come into usage to distinguish from all previous depressions, which were nowhere near as severe as that one.
Right. So realizing that this was a unique event, or at least a unique event in the lifetime of the people who were alive at that time.
That took time. Yeah.
Yeah. That was only in retrospect. Do you think that this Great Depression that we're in right now, and would you call this a Great Depression, will be recognized in retrospect, or do we have the ability to recognize it for what it is right now? And what's the criteria that you would use to say, yes, this is a depression?
Well, firstly, we do have the capacity to classify it properly, but that's a capacity which only a handful of people who actually have any understanding of what caused the crisis actually have. I'm one of them, but I'm not the only one. People like Michael Hudson, for example, and Pettifor's and so on are others who identified this as not your ordinary recession. Something, therefore, has to be classified differently. Closest thing to it is the Great Depression, though just recently Ken Rogoff, who's one of the empirically oriented neoclassically originated economists I have some time and respect for, he's come out and said we stop calling it the Great Recession, call it the Great Contraction. And that, in that sense, gives you, we'd call both the Great Depression and this experience a Great Contraction. And what helps you identify it in a causal sense is that what causes a crisis like this is a sustained reduction in the level of private debt after that private debt has reached unsustainable levels previously. So the Great Depression, just to give you an idea of that, had a level of private debt that peaked at 235% of GDP, but that was after 2 years of deflation after the start of the crisis. It began at a level of 175% of GDP. Once the whole thing was over, and by over I mean the end of the Second World War, because the Great Depression led to the Second World War, the debt level was back down to 45%. So you thought from 175% of GDP to 45% of GDP, and then the whole thing started all over again. We have gone from 45%
if I may interrupt
to 300%. Yeah.
If I may, before you continue with the story, you said then the whole thing started all over again. Did it start all over again in the 1940s, or do you mean it started all over again in the 1980s or 90s or the 2000s?
In one sense, if I wanted to say when we actually got into the speculative bubble stage that led to the crisis we're now in, I'd date that from the 60s. You're quite right.
Okay.
But after the 1930s experience, the debt level was paid down so far that we probably got below what you might regard as sustainable and sensible level of debt for the American economy when you hit 45% of GDP.
Right. So we hit 45%. So then to current day, you were. This is where you were going when I interrupted you. My apologies.
Yeah, no worries. You got to 300%. It has now fallen to about 250%. Now, we've had other instances in the past where the debt levels reached a peak and fallen back a bit. So the 1970s, for example, you had a 1 or 2% fall in level of debt compared to GDP, private debt. Then the 1990s, you had a more substantial fall. I've forgotten the exact numbers. I'll bring them up while we talk. But you had a fall from, say, something of the order of 170% down to about 165%. Well, this time we've gone from 300% to 250, and
in what period of time?
Pardon?
In what period of time?
Over a 2-year time period.
Over a 2-year time period, we've dropped about 50% of GDP in terms of private debt.
Yeah.
That's
very fast.
Yeah, that's pretty radical. That's pretty dramatic. So, are you suggesting that we've gone from 300% more or less of debt, 3 times GDP in terms of private debt, to 2.5 times GDP of private debt, and we won't be out of this depression until we get down to what?
About one times GDP.
About $15 trillion, 100% of GDP.
Yeah. And no, sorry, 20 trillion. Because the private debt level in America peaked at $43 trillion. It's been paid down a small amount. What you've got a combination of 2 factors at once. Even though GDP is not growing, it's growing a bit. So you've had that slight increase in the denominator of the ratio of debt to GDP.
Right.
But at the top level, you have the debt also being reduced in actual terms. So that combination together means your ratio has fallen from about 300% to 250%. I'll give you the exact number.
Right, but it's got to get down to 100% before we're not in a depression anymore. And at the current rate of deleveraging, I mean, if we're dropping 25% a year, and we've got another 150% to go, is that another 5 years?
Something like that. 5 to 10 years. I was just looking at the exact figures now. It peaked at 301% in especially February, March of 2009, and fast forward to 2011, it's down to 260%. So you've fallen 40% over 2 years. Now, I think when you get to a debt level of around about the 100% level of GDP, you're out of the woods in terms of not having a massive amount of speculative debt still on the books, and the effect of people reducing their debt by reducing their consumption and investment will be over. But that could take up to 10 years.
So we could be in this depression. Now, is it going to get – we have just a few seconds here before the break is going to hit, but then we'll continue our conversation. Is this going to get worse before it gets better, or is this just going to be awful for a while?
I think it's going to stay at this awful level and get slightly worse because, remember, you need a growing economy to absorb a growing population. And if you have a population, when you're growing at 1 or 2% per annum, and you have technological improvements occurring at about a rate of about 1% increase in productivity per annum, you need to grow at 3% simply to keep your unemployment levels steady. If you instead have the impetus that investment gives you taken out of the economy, then you're going to look at being about at best 2% rate of growth. So that unemployment rate will slowly creep up, and that's not pleasant for anybody.
So that's actually slowly sliding backwards, actually.
That's right,
We're talking with Professor Steve Keen, Associate Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of Western Sydney, the author of Debunking Economics. His website, debtdeflation.com. Check it out. We'll be right back with Professor Keen. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Debt, D-E-B-T, deflation, deflation.com is Professor Keen's website. It's brilliant. Check it out. We'll be right back with that. Now, Professor Keen, you're still with us?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, great. At the bottom of the hour, there will be a 6-minute break where we actually, both you and I, stop talking, and all of our stations go to either our commercial stations go to commercials and our non-commercial stations play a newscast. Right now, our commercial stations are in break, but all our non-commercial stations are with us, and all of our viewers on television are still with us.
Right,
so
okay.
we have about half our audience right now. So anything we say, I'll try to summarize and repeat when we come back from this break. And this break is going to last about 4.5 minutes, I think.
Okay.
So how did we get here?
We got here by basically unleashing the financial sector. And we unleashed it right back, that's why I dated back to 1945, right back with the terms of the Bretton Woods Agreement and the way we reconstituted finance after the Great Depression and the Second World War. Because there were two things. Internationally, we allowed the American currency to become the international reserve currency, and that really set up the international system for a fall at some point, which we're now seeing with the madness in currencies.
That was the primary outcome of Bretton Woods, wasn't it?
Yeah, Bretton Woods what was called Keynes's plan at Bretton Woods involved using what are called special drawing rights for all international trade.
Right.
So if you wanted to buy the new edition of my book off me from Australia, then I would be I'd have to convert. You'd have to send American dollars to me. You'd have to buy special drawing rights off your central bank, and then ship those to me via my central bank to my private bank, where they'd be converted to Australian dollars, and the book would go back your way. That was Keynes's idea of meaning we could have international commerce without relying upon a national currency.
Right.
And what we've instead done, because the American delegation wanted the American dollar to be the reserve currency, we've got to the level now where if any other country running a trade deficit was forced to control its economy back in the days of fixed exchange rates, the Americans would fundamentally print more dollars. So it gave them the potential to debase the currency, and that's certainly what's been happening. But that's the international stuff. The part that which is more what James Rickard focuses on. What I'm concerned about is the domestic arrangements. And the real cause of any bubble like this is people borrowing money to gamble on rising asset prices, and by the act of borrowing money, actually drive the asset prices up as well. So we get caught in what engineers call a positive feedback loop.
Right, and this is why gold is spiraling up and oil has...
Yeah, everything's spiraling up. But people are borrowing money to gamble on the price of assets, and by the act of borrowing money and buying the assets with borrowed money, they drive up the price. It's a positive feedback loop which works upwards, but it also works in the opposite directions, remains a positive feedback loop, but with negative trajectory when you get to the stage where people don't want to take any more debt on, so that particular engine stops, or the rate of change of debt prices turns around. You then get a negative feedback where falling asset prices both cause and are caused by people deciding to reduce their debt levels.
Right,
and that's
the
deleveraging
process. That is the deleveraging. And thus the depression. The falling prices. And yet we're seeing rising asset prices in a time of deleveraging. Or is that simply people moving their assets into a small category of things like gold and food and or speculating in them?
Yeah, it's still the latter, because one thing which actually happens, has happened dramatically in this particular bubble, and this is how you can differentiate the Great Depression from what we're going through now, which you might call Great Depression 2 or the Great Contraction, is that the distribution of debt is very different. So even the private debt now is much larger than it was at the start of the Great Depression. My reference point is the level of debt in 1930, which is about
I'm sorry. We'll recap this in just a second, okay? When we come right back from the other side of this. Hold on just a second. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Solar World. SolarWorld.com for information on solar electricity. Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're talking with Professor Steve Keen, Associate Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of Western Sydney, talking with us live from Australia, where it's probably the middle of the night. And he's the author of Debunking Economics, his website, debtdeflation.com. And Professor Keen, just to quickly recap, you're suggesting that the seeds of this second Great Depression were sown in Bretton Woods in 1945 with the U.S. dollar becoming the reserve currency of the world, and that this depression is different from that of the 1930s because this level of private debt that you identified as being 300%, 3 times GDP, and it's now dropped down to 2.5% over the last couple of years, thus producing the depression, that is fundamentally different in character than the level of private debt at the time of the last Great Depression. How is that? And have I characterized accurately the summary here?
Yes, you have. When back in the 1930s, with the level of debt peaking before deflation began, peaking at 175% of GDP, from that point on, the level of debt reduced. Nominal debt actually fell, but the ratio to GDP rose because of deflation. The reason that
because GDP was collapsing.
GDP collapsed and so did prices. Prices were falling by up to and over 10% per annum, as well as real output falling by much the same level. So you had this. If you look at the ratio of debt to GDP, then the denominator just collapsed. Sure. And that drove up the ratio, even though the numerator was also falling. Now, that debt was being 175% in total. About 125% was private sector, non-financial businesses, the shops, manufacturers, and so on. Yeah. So when they found themselves that the crisis beginning, they had to service their own debt, not it was their debt level that was constraining their capacity to spend. Right. Well, they had to pay their debt down, and the first response was to try to improve their market share by cutting their prices. But of course, they all cut their prices. Right. Therefore, prices fell faster than businesses repaid their debt. And Irving Fisher expressed this in what I call Fisher's paradox. He said, the more the debtors pay, the more they owe. Right. Now, that's what gave us a really, really sharp downturn. This time round, even though we've got roughly 1.7 times as much debt at the peak of the crisis, 301% of GDP versus 175, that debt is only about 75% of it at its peak was owed by non-financial businesses. The rest was owed by the household sector and by the finance sector. And the households, rather than having, I think, a debt level of something in the order of 25 or 30% of GDP back at the Great Depression, have almost 100% now. So it's not the producers and the retailers who are debt constrained this time around, it's the customers.
And without customers, you have no economy. Is this why you're suggesting that we should consider Leviticus 25:10, consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all inhabitants thereof? It shall be a jubilee unto you. You shall return every man unto his own clan, every man to his family. The land, it goes on. Basically, forgive all debt, free the slaves, equalize everything. Yep.
That's something we have to do a modern Jubilee. We can't do an old-fashioned one, unfortunately, because back then, of course, the advantage was you had a very obvious class of people who were debt slaves and a very obvious class of people who were moneylenders and landlords, and you could easily, you would reduce the power of the moneylenders and the landlords by doing this, but that was politically vital because otherwise you weren't going to have an army, and you were certainly going to have a slave revolt. So it was easy to identify who should suffer, and quite often the moneylenders suffered by having a rather severe haircut, starting roughly around the shoulder level. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen anymore, nor can we do even a 1930s version. And I don't know enough about the bank holiday period under Roosevelt, but I expect we'll find this happened during the bank holiday. Mm-hmm. A lot of debts were reduced at the bank level. Yes. In that period, so that your mortgages were reduced and so on.
Well, plus Roosevelt created a federal agency to take on household debt, to buy household debts out of the banks and give people federally guaranteed loans.
Back then, all that did was affect the incomes of the banks. Now, of course, if you do it now, the trouble is not only do the banks and the non-bank financial sector, whose debt level, by the way, peaked at 120% of GDP versus trivial levels back in the Great Depression, rather than the shadow banking sector being the only ones who suffer, they've sold those products to middle America as assets to have in one's pension scheme and so on. Mm-hmm. So if we actually abolish the debt, we wouldn't just be affecting the banks now, it'd be affecting people who bought products off the banks.
Right, and not just middle America, it's all over the world.
All over the world. I mean, one of the very first places to suffer of all things was a council in Norway when this whole damn thing began, because they'd been persuaded to buy some AAA-rated bonds by American banks.
Right, and this little town in Norway went bankrupt because they had bought this stuff from Goldman Sachs or whoever it was.
In good faith.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, we actually trust these people. The essential thing about money is trust. Right. And of course, it's been massively abused by the financial sector. But they've scrambled the egg so completely that unscrambling it is really what we're attempting to do here.
So 1 minute until the break. In that 1 minute, quickly, and we'll continue the conversation after the break, but 1 minute after the break, how do we do that?
Yeah. We have to find a way of rebalancing the system from being fundamentally credit-based money to, in this transition at least, fundamentally fiat-based, without, while still providing cash for those who've been savers rather than being debtors.
Is that would that be a variation on the Muslim notion that, and what used to be the biblical notion that you shall not charge interest, you may only charge fees for banking? No,
I don't think so. I'm not particularly. I don't see the problem with charging interest. What I see is this level of principle that's been extended, which the whole word principle implies what's gone wrong, because principled, it means done in responsible behaviour. We've had irresponsible increase of the level of debt outstanding, and we have to find a responsible way of reducing it.
Okay, and we'll talk about how that can be done after the break. We're talking with Professor Steve Keen. He's the Associate Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of Western Sydney, the author of Debunking Economics. His website, debtdeflation.com. I encourage you to check it out. And we will continue in about 5 minutes here with our conversation with Professor Keen. Stick around.
The best things in life are free, but you can keep them for the birds and bees. Now give me money.
Okay, I have so many questions about this. It's maybe crazy. We are talking with Professor Steve Keen. I'm sorry I had demoted you to Associate Professor Keen, full Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of Western Sydney, the author of the brilliant book Debunking Economics and the website debtdeflation.com, Twitter at Prof. Steve, S-T-E-V-E, Keen, K-E-E-N. And you're still with us?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, great. First of all, we broached the topic of a Jubilee, and I want to get back to that in just a minute, and how that might be done in a way that's politically not just palatable, but even conceivable. But first, we began this conversation 30 minutes ago with you pointing out that the ratio of private debt, not government debt, but private debt to GDP, had been around 175%, up to 175%, that provoked the Great Depression, and then it got deleveraged down to 45%, and then it hit 300% in around 2008, and now it's deleveraged down to 250%, but it still has a long way to go. All that, and please at any point correct me if I'm mischaracterizing or misremembering anything you said. All of that said, what role does the stuff that in our political dialogue here in the United States everybody's hysterical about, and we're hearing the European Union is all hysterical about, particularly right now with Italy and Spain, what role does government debt play in all of this, and what role does the trade deficit, the trade debt, play in all of this? Okay.
The government debt fundamentally acts as it should act, and has in some ways in the past acted. It's what you might call a homeostatic stabilizer in an air conditioning system. But like you've got a room that's overheating, which you could regard as the private sector having a boom, then the government sector effectively chills the room by running a surplus, taking money out of the economy and reducing the temperature. But then when you have in the other direction, when you have a slump by the private sector, so the room's freezing, and the government goes in the opposite direction. And that's pretty much what you'll see. The energy output of an air conditioner runs in the reverse direction to the energy level in a room, and a similar sort of analogy can apply to how the government sector debt generally behaves.
So Keynes and FDR were right in saying the private sector is collapsing, so we're going to heat up the public sector. We're going to borrow money and spend it on hiring people to plant trees.
Yeah. Now, the trouble is it's hard for people to do that. This sounds irresponsible, certainly if you come from a right-wing perspective. It sounds, the state spending money and being irresponsible, et cetera, et cetera. The way I look at it is to regard the economy as having two fundamental sources of money. So what maintains economic activity is the turnover of money, but what actually enables it to expand is growth in the actual stock of money. And there are two institutions which can generate more money. One is the private sector by lending money to businesses and individuals. The other is the government by running a deficit. And what you have had in this, what's caused this enormous bubble we were in prior to the crash beginning, was the private sector lending enormous amounts of money and funding the private sector, the private banks lending to the private sector, funding gambling on asset prices, particularly houses, of course, in America.
Mm-hmm. So
that gave you a false boom. But of course, to fill that false boom, you're also buying large numbers of goods from China to fill those very large, huge empty American houses you're building. Yeah. So you ran a trade deficit as well at the same time. Now, those three factors that affect the amount of money in circulation, because the loans you were taking out in America were being converted into renminbi to buy goods from China. So you had a double leakage going on there.
Right.
So, but I prefer to look at the entire globe as one system and drill down. International currency makes it much more complicated, and maybe even my head starts to spin when I start trying to do that on a telephone conversation. But at the basic mechanism is to look at the relationship between the private sector debt and public sector debt. The growth in both of them changes the amount of money in circulation. Now, if you have a private sector massively deleveraging as we're doing now, that is actually taking money out of circulation. So the amount of money turning over and maintaining economic activity is falling. If the government sector attempts to run a surplus, they would be doing the same thing.
But now, you say when the government sector attempts to run a surplus, another way of saying that would be if the government sector tries to practice austerity, or if it tries to cut back on its spending, because, we're so far in debt, there's no way we're going to run a surplus. But if we have less debt, if we cut back our debt, if we do what the Republican Party is suggesting, that's going to be contractive, as well as the deleveraging in the private sector is contractive. You add those two things together, and you've got a horrible Great Depression. Am I saying in plain English what you're saying as an economist?
Yes, you are. I need a bit of translation occasionally. Yes, you're right, exactly. And the people have a hard time getting their heads around this because they tend to think in a very across time, what I call static reasoning. They don't look through time and think in a dynamic sense because they see this crisis, and they also think about it in a household type analogy when you've got a much more complicated entity than an economy is. And they think, well, if I'm running a deficit, I've got to cut back on my spending, and therefore they want me to get right. My own system is to spend less, and therefore that applies at the national level as well. But what is actually causing the crisis is the level of debt you've got into. And think about it even as a household. There's two ways you can handle that. One is you can spend less. The other is you can work a lot harder.
Right.
Now, if you actually, if I want to appeal to the American sense of enterprise, the best way to get out of trouble is to work harder, rather than just simply to spend less.
Right, and the analogy here for work harder
is have more economic activity, not less.
Is have more government spending, even though it's done with debt.
Yeah, well, because if the private sector is cutting the level of spending, then you've got a huge debt burden. And if you actually tell people to save more money, what that really translates as is slow down the rate of circulation of money and slow down the amount of economic activity it supports while trying to reduce the debt level. Now, of course, what happens is the ratio, if you do that, your economy slows down, your debt level remains the same, your debt burden actually gets worse.
And is this why the UK right now is sliding into a recession?
Yeah.
Because
and it's why Europe actually signed its own suicide note when it signed the Maastricht Treaty, which set this entire thing up in many ways. But of course, England not being part of that, it shows that austerity, even without something as stupid as the Maastricht Treaty, austerity actually pushes you backwards. And each time you attempt to do it, you end up with a bigger debt problem than you had beforehand.
Why would these people buy into this notion that you can somehow cut yourself to prosperity?
I know. It's because, unfortunately, a totally insane theory of economics, which is superficially plausible but fundamentally insane, has taken over the economics profession.
Are you talking about Milton Friedman?
70s. And that belief
Misuse?
system has become part of how we all think, including politicians, about this problem. And it actually obscures the complexity of a complex capitalist market system and leads us to make insane decisions. Again, if I use an analogy people might be aware of, if you know as a driver and you're going around a corner, most of us, if we go too quickly, will slide off the edge of the road because our natural reflex is to turn into the turn we're doing if we start to slide. A professional driver knows you turn the wheel in the opposite direction. Now, that is partly what we're talking about here, because it sounds simple to say if you're running a deficit, you're increasing a debt level, you should reduce your spending and pay your debt off.
Right.
But that's a bit like turning your wheel towards the turn as the car's getting out of control. You've actually got to turn in the opposite direction to regain control.
Right. And then eventually, now the United States came out of World War II with a public debt that was 127% of GDP, if my recollection is correct.
That's pretty much accurate. Yep.
And we paid that down to within 10 or 15% of GDP within a decade without any austerity whatsoever. In fact, we did the exact opposite. Truman and Eisenhower were spending like drunken sailors, building a national highway system, hospitals, schools, bridges, roads, communications infrastructure, on and on and on. And it grew the economy so much that tax revenues increased and we paid down our debt.
Exactly.
Now, why can't politicians, whether it's David Cameron in the UK or Paul Ryan and John Boehner here in the United States, or for that matter, Barack Obama, look at that period of time and say, gee, that worked pretty well. Why don't we try that?
Yeah, well, partly one of the reasons it wouldn't be as easy to do then as now as it was then is that back then, of course, private debt, which had ballooned out of control in the 1920s, exploded with the deflation of the 30s, and then fallen back down with the government stimulus packages of the late 1930s and the impact of the Second World War, fallen back to 45% of GDP. That was low and not causing any particular problems, and it was also rising at the same time, which is rising debt is not a bad thing when that rising debt fundamentally finances investment. So you had the incredible industrial growth of the American economy in the post-war period as well. So you had a debt not encumbering the system, rising debt playing a legitimate role to some extent in boosting investment, and then a government sector boosting spending and for the infrastructure, which gave you a more productive private sector to begin with. This time round, you're counteracting the biggest level of deleveraging in human history. And that deleveraging, even though the government's throwing large amounts of money in, this money being sucked out by the private sector deleveraging more than counteracts it. So again, if you look at the current level of debt, the government debt has risen about 30-35% of GDP since the crisis began. The fall in private debt's been about closer to 45-50%. So even with the government stimulus topping up the system by 35% of GDP, the private sector's dipped into it by 45%. We're net negative.
Amazing. And you just said the fastest or the worst deleveraging in human history. I want to get back to that and back to the Jubilee. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're talking with Dr. Steve Keen, professor of economics and finance at the University of Western Sydney, the author of Debunking Economics. His website, debtdeflation.com. And welcome back, Dr. Keen. You're still with us?
Indeed.
Good. Again, our commercial stations have left us to play commercials, but everybody else is still with us. So I would like to revisit just for a moment. I want to get back to this worst deleveraging. We'll do that right after the next break so that everybody can hear it. But I'd like to revisit this notion of why is it that our politicians don't get this? You said this is insane school of economics. Is this the Milton Friedman Chicago School? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the developments in the Milton Friedman School. Milton was nowhere near as mad as his successors. The successors have taken insanity to a whole new level, which I expose, I hope, and become almost hilarious guys on occasions in the new edition of Debunking Economics. But that mindset dominates how politicians and economists think about the economy, which is why the vast majority of economists who are called neoclassical economists had no idea this crisis was coming until long after it actually hit. Only the mavericks like myself who rejected this theory decades ago saw it coming because we focus upon the obvious things that they don't focus upon, including, obviously, the level of private debt. So that supplies a mindset about how the economy operates that believes the economy is fundamentally stable, and also has spent the last 30 or 40 years denigrating the role of the government sector and saying that government spending does no good at all. So behind closed doors, some of the advice these economists are giving to the government now are that austerity is actually expansionary. And their logic, and I hate to use the word logic because it's an abuse of the English language, but their logic goes in the following way. They say that we all have the capacity for rational thought. They then define rational thought as the capacity to accurately prophesize the future.
Huh.
And we then are told that if we know the government is going to reduce its spending now, therefore we know that our taxes in future are going to be less to pay for that spending. Therefore, we're willing to spend more to balance the government's reduction in spending. They first called this reverse Ricardian equivalence. When that was too much of a mouthful, they changed it to expansionary fiscal consolidation. It's actually the pup that poor old Cameron was sold, to be told that if you cut government spending, the economy will boom. Well, look at Cameron right now.
Yeah, and it is
sheer nonsense, but that's the sort of guff they're being told behind closed doors.
And this is to ascribe any of this to David Ricardo would be crazy, wouldn't it? Yeah, an insult.
Yeah,
exactly.
In writing the second edition of Debunking Economics, one little revelation occurred to me, and that sounds quite strange when I first say it, but it's become a theme. Neoclassical economists don't understand neoclassical economics. They don't even know their own school of thought.
Right.
But when they jump into the classical school and put somebody like Ricardo's name to this, I mean, even Ricardo's most absurd creation, which was the theory of comparative advantage,
right.
I'm willing to tear that apart on screen.
Sure.
Even that was far more logical than this idea of reverse so-called Ricardian equivalence. So right. Some of them, like Paul Krugman, call themselves new Keynesians. I'm sorry, he hasn't got a clue of what Keynes was on about.
Yeah.
So they abuse the language and they abuse history by applying labels like this to themselves when most of them haven't read Keynes, certainly haven't read Ricardo, and don't understand their own theory, school of thought, let alone those that they sometimes borrow names from.
Yeah, and then they go off and quote Adam Smith, and they've never read his theory, his book on moral. What was
philosophy?
Yeah, moral philosophy. Yeah, his theory of moral, and which trumps wealth by. In any case, we're talking with Steve Keen. We'll be right back, Professor Steve Keen, right after this.
Disorder, from the sirens night and day, from the fires of the homeless, from the ashes of the gay. Democracy is coming to the USA.
Welcome back. We're talking with Professor Steve Keen, Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of Western Sydney, the author of Debunking Economics, a brilliant book. His website, debtdeflation.com. Check it out. Professor Keen, in the 6 minutes we have left here, more or less, let me just throw two things out and let you go at them. You made the comment before the last break that we're seeing the largest or the most rapid, I forget your phrase, you could correct me on this, deleveraging in the history of humankind. That sent chills down my back. It's like, okay, does that mean this is going to be the worst depression in the history of humankind? Is it going to go international? Is it going to be the kind of thing that's going to lead to World War II like we saw last time? And secondly, we had been talking about Jubilee. I would love to hear your thoughts on how some form of debt forgiveness could be done here in the United States or internationally that is politically viable. So,
okay, I'll go very quickly through the first bit. The reason deleveraging hits the economy is that total demand in a credit-based economy is not just your income, it's income plus change in debt. And that change in debt can be spent on two things, investment or speculation. Unfortunately, the vast majority in the last few decades was spent on speculation. Therefore, because debt can go from rising to falling, it can have a dramatic turnaround in demand. And to take the situation of the American economy in 2008, roughly, your GDP was about $14 trillion. The increase in debt that year was about $4 trillion. So total spending in the economy on both goods and services and flip that house buying of assets was about $18 trillion. Fast forward to 2010, GDP was still roughly $14 trillion, which is the source of incomes. The change in debt was minus $2 trillion. So we went from being an $18 trillion economy to a $12 trillion economy in about 2 years.
Wow.
That's why it's so severe.
Right.
And therefore, that's so long as that continues happening, you're going to have a reduction occurring over time in demand, and you're going to grow more slowly than your population grows and rising unemployment and so on. So you have to look at, should the debt ever have been extended? And the answer is no. It wasn't so much irresponsibly borrowed, it was irresponsibly lent. You've got to really say that if you look at where the real responsibility lies, it was the banking sector creating debt because it makes money out of itself out of creating debt and enticing us into that through rising asset prices, which the debt itself caused. Now, the trouble is they then on-sold that debt by securitization throughout the population. So if you reduce the debt, you'd also reduce the income of anybody in a pension scheme.
Right.
You reduce council incomes and so on. So it'd be monumentally damaging to go for an old-fashioned Jubilee. What I've called a modern Jubilee would involve effectively quantitative easing for the public rather than the banks. There's an enormous amount of money being given to the banks. So measures of up to $8 trillion now being spoken about.
Yes.
$8 trillion. Give that money instead to the public through their bank accounts in such a way that if the particular individual has debt, then the money has to be used to reduce their own debt. But if the individual doesn't have debt, that could be either a company or a person, that person gets the remainder is cash in their accounts. That would then mean that people who are in debt have their debt level reduced, so the deleveraging happens very rapidly, instantly virtually. But simultaneously, people who don't have debt have cash they can spend out of, which compensates them for the fact that the debt they own no longer has the same income stream coming in through it.
And
it would still be disruptive, and you would still have lots of banks that would be affected by it because bank cash flows would also fall dramatically. Right. So it's not easy. It isn't painless. There is no such thing as a painless way out of this crisis. But something like that may ultimately be palatable.
It is something like that. Only the banksters get screwed, basically.
Yeah.
But
we've got to focus the attention on the banks alone.
But I've raised this before with conservative economists who have said, but that $7 trillion that was given to the banks wasn't a gift; it was a loan, and they've paid it back. And what you're talking about here is debt forgiveness. That's a forever.
Yeah, we need a discontinuity. This is what's very hard for people to get their heads around. This problem has been a slow, gradual, continuous increase in the level of debt, lending money that didn't do anything productive whatsoever, just let us gamble on house prices.
Right.
Then we've got to the stage where that level of debt is so great that, as Michael Hudson puts it, debts that can't be repaid won't be repaid, or you've got to work out how not to repay them. What, in fact, is happening is people are trying to find a way to continue honouring those debts, and that they want to maintain this continuous process. We need a discontinuity.
Well,
and the banks, giving them the banks won't do it.
And continuing the debt is what's going on right now, is it not? Where the announcement today that 5 different central banks are going to help bail out the European community.
Yeah, if they give it to the banks themselves, again, it's just continue the same process. They've got to do it in such a way that reduces private debt. But ironically, the economists in charge of those central banks don't believe private debt is even an issue in the economy still, even after the empirical evidence of the last 2 or 3 years. So they would be giving it to the banks, or providing as loans to governments. They expect the governments to repay. All of it is trying to maintain a continuous process when a discontinuity is needed. So
the economists in Europe and the European community are as crazy as the Republican economists here in the United States.
Yeah, they all read out of the same. They all got taught by Paul Samuelson, Milton Friedman, Hal Varian, if they did, and also a guy called Mascalel. And if you have to read the stuff in these textbooks to believe that anybody can be so nutty as to take this stuff seriously, which again, Debunking Economics 2 goes through that in great detail. But because they all drank from the same Kool-Aid, effectively, they're all preaching the same Jamestown religion. So only when we break the grip of those people on economic theory are we likely to get anything even vaguely sensible being suggested to politicians.
Yeah, and Jim Jones is alive and well all over the world.
Indeed.
It seems. We're just about out of time. I think we have just a couple of seconds. So I want to thank you, Professor Keene, so much for being with us today. It's really an honor to speak with you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm delighted, and I'm going to send a copy of the second edition of the book your way as well.
I look forward to it, and in fact, I'll pay for it, and we can do that whole central bank thing.
We'll do it. Just a review copy. The publishers will pay this one, mate.
Okay. DebtDeflation.com is Professor Keene's website. DEBT, deflation, DEFLATION.com, just like it sounds. Be sure to check it out. His book, Debunking Economics. It's well worth the read.